Well, we have a new world chess champion, the youngest to ever do it, Gukesh Dommaraju of India. Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who've been following the World Chess Championship, this was highly anticipated. Everybody was asking, can Gukesh Dommaraju, as young as he is, become the World Chess Champion? And the answer to that is yes. So that is what we have here today for you guys. I got the last game, number 14, between Liren, the, as of before the video, current World Chess Champion, and Gukesh Dommaraju, the challenger. So all of my people in the Philippines, I would say Maraming Salamat. Anybody who is coming from China, I would say Shishi. Anybody who is coming from India, I will say Mika Nandri, or I'll say Dania Varalu. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. But if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we got for this game, son. All right, man, so we got knight f3, so we start off with the rating, but as you guys always know, it transposes almost every single time. We do see the move d5, and then we have g3, and we have the start of the King's Indian attack. So after we get through a few more moves, it should look very familiar to some of you guys that play d4 and play against the King's Indian defense. We do have c5, bishop goes to g2. We got knight to c6. We do see the move d4. And then we do see the move e6. Now, d4 is actually very important because if you don't have the move d4, basically you just allow black to just get the move e4 in with just pretty much no holdback. So if you played something kind of like, let's say like this, to kind of prevent like this type of move, you would be looking at something like this. And like I said, you guys see this is kind of the reverse. You have just given white their really, really nice center, but we do not see that. Like I said, after d4, we do see the move e6. We got castles by white, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, and then we do see knight g to e7. And like I was telling you guys before, this is pretty much kind of like a Queen's Gambit decline-ish situation, kind of like with King's Indian stuff. And we are going to be seeing this move c4 breaking in the center, which is what we see right now. We got knight taking d4, queen taking d4, and then the very important move, knight to c6. And this is asking the white queen exactly what do you want to do. Not only that, we are making sure that, when we do capture here, wherever the queen might go, that in a case of a queen taking d8, we don't have to take back with the king, and we have the knight protecting right there. We do see queen going back to d1, definitely the most logical square. As you're trying to develop these pieces, you have the rook holding the queen, just in case anything goes wrong. So we do see the move d4. We got the move e3. Kind of the same idea as I was telling you guys before. D4 trying to take away knight c3 from white. We got bishop to c5, and this is the novelty of the game. Kind of crazy because, this is definitely the most important point pretty much for both sides right now. So, this is a very logical move, but it is the first time we have seen it in the world ever. Pawn takes d4, bishop takes d4. We do see knight going to c3. We're not really worried that if bishop takes here on c3 because, yeah, you are doubling your pawns, but you do have double bishops. So, when you're doubling your pawns, you have double bishops. You kind of have a little compensation. We do see castles by black. We got knight going up to b5, asking the bishop what does it want to do. We do see bishop b6. We got the move b3. We got a6. Knight goes back to c3. Bishop goes back to d4. And then we are just in time to play bishop to b2. And then we see the move e5. Now, because the structure was somewhat French-like, you kind of had a little problem with this bishop. And you really don't too much want to open up this diagonal because obviously the knight is just kind of hanging in the wind. So we don't want to do that. So one of the most logical things is to be able to push the move e5 and get our bishop to some type of playable area. We do see queen going to d2. Bishop goes to e6. We do see knight to d5, plopping itself on that really beautiful outpost on d5. Black immediately is trying to say, hey, bro, I'm going to try to destabilize your knight by trying to kick this pawn away from the protection of it. So we do see pawn taking b5, which does hit the knight immediately. So black doesn't really have time to take d5 without getting something back. We got pawn taking b5, and then we have a cute little move. Knight to f4. You are threatening this knight, and you have also discovered an attack on this knight right here. We got pawn taking f4, bishop taking c6. We got bishop taking b2, and then we have queen taking b2. And everything is pretty even. You have same color bishops. You have the same amount of pawns. So everything's kind of everything up to this point. We do see rook to b8, rook f to d1. Why not hit the queen? Absolutely. Let me get my thing, kind of cleared up. Killing me, Smalls. Come on, bro. There we go. I don't know why my thing always gets blurry, man. I might need to get a different camera. But anyway, we got rook f to d1, putting it opposite the queen. Always something that you want to keep in mind. Get you a little tempo gainer. We do see queen going to b6, hitting the bishop on c6. The bishop just drops back to f3. And I mean, the computer's basically like, hey, man, this is triple zeros. There's nothing to see here. Like, I mean, what are we looking at, right? But that's the computer for you. Pawn takes g3. We got h taking g3, and then we do have the move b4. And b4 might not really seem like it's doing a whole lot, but you do have what I like to call a pawn freeze going on, and it is trying to make it very undesirable for you to push this a pawn. But what we see is the move a4 anyway. We got pawn taking a3, and then rook taking a3. And then we actually have the move g6. You always want to make sure you're being careful with your luft. Create, a little bit of space for your king to breathe. Now, some of you guys might be wondering, okay, wait a minute. I got bishop, queen, and the rook right here on this pawn. Isn't that just a free pawn? Absolutely not. If you did want to go ahead and try to grab that pawn, you would be getting caught up, reaching in the cookie jar, and you would be looking at rook to b1, and then you'd be really sad, because you have now just pinned this bishop to this queen, and you're going to be losing some material, homie. So don't do that. Like I said, we did see the move g6. We got queen trying to trade itself on d4, and we see black is avoiding the trade by going queen to b5. And again, in this position, it might kind of seem like, okay, I don't really have like the same pinning situations, right? Well, actually you do. It just looks a little different. If you did see the bishop taking now, you would be looking at queen taking here, and then rook taking, and then rook to b1. And you see that pattern kind of still exists in the position. We did not see any of that. We do see Gukesh just avoiding the trade of queens right here. We got the move b4, and queen takes b4, queen takes b4, rook takes b4. And for those of you that are kind of wondering, like, hey, is this like some type of trap going on? No, this is just a pawn. I'm not sure like exactly what Liren was looking at in this position. I mean, maybe he was seeing some kind of something going on, but I don't know. But this really just kind of does throw away a pawn. Gukesh is like, hey, man, that's cool. I'll take a pawn if you're giving a pawn. We got rook up to a8. We got rook taking a8, rook taking a8. And I mean, even though you are down a pawn, if you are white, this is either a rook or a bishop in game down a pawn, which you guys know, you have a really good chance of drawing those kind of games. So I know that at this point, Liren is like, bro, I'm not even really tripping. And I mean, the computer is agreeing. It's maybe slightly better for black, but it's not like it's completely won. We do see the move g5. We got bishop to d5, encouraging a trade. We got bishop going to f5. So I'm going to kind of run through these moves a little bit. We just kind of have a lot of maneuvering going on in this situation. We do rook to c1, king to g7. We got rook up to c7, bishop back to g6. Because you kind of got to do something about this pawn right here, homie. You can't do this because bishop takes and you are pinned right here. So don't do that. So we see bishop to g6. We got rook down to c4. Offering a trade. Now, in these games right here, in this specific in-game, you can trade pieces down if you end up with like a king and pawn in-game. It is drawable. You just kind of have to be careful about when you trade pieces down because there can be situations where you are going to lose the game. But we do see a rook to b1 with check. The king slides up to g2. Rook to e1. We got rook over to b4. And like I said, there's just a lot of maneuvering going on. We got h5, rook to a4, rook e5. Bishop drops back down to f3. We got king to h6. We got the king down. We got rook up to e6. So you can see that both players are just, basically, they're not trying to really trade. They're not really trying to do anything too crazy. They're just kind of maneuvering and just trying to, get themselves in a good position. We do see the move g4. Bishop goes to d5, rook to d6. Bishop drops back to b7, king to g5. And then we have the move f3. And like I said, everything is very, very even still. Nothing major has really changed. You just kind of saw both players just kind of maneuvering around a little bit. We do see the move f5, pawn takes g4, pawn takes g4. And one of the important things that you want to note about this in-game is all of the pawns for both sides are on one side of the board. So when you get into a situation where you might trade like a bishop or a rook or something like that down, and you might pretty much just have king and pawns, This is a very highly drawable endgame because, like I said, the kings are on one side. They do really good with taking care of pawns that are just on one side of the board. It's when you have endgames where you have pawns kind of all over the place, where it gets a little bit hard for one side, over the other. Because kings, obviously, as you guys know, they just move one square at a time. So it's really kind of hard for a king to go like all the way across the board, like quickly, right? So we got rook to b4, we got bishop back to f7, king to f2, we got rook down, check, king goes back to g1, we got king up to f6, rook to b6 with check, king to g5, rook down to b4, bishop b6, rook to a4, rook to b2, we got bishop back to a8, king to f6, we got rook going to f4, we got king up to e5, and we got the move rook down to f2. We got rook taking f2 and then king taking f2. And we have actually reached a position. There is an only move. There is one winning move in the position if you are Gukesh. So if you want to pause the video and guess that winning move, go ahead and do so. Okay, so the winning move in this position, like I was telling you guys before, I mean, you have to be really careful about when you trade pieces. Because of the king's position, black's king position, and the fact there's something I'm going to explain to you guys in a minute as far as endgame concepts is concerned. But Gukesh is in a position where he can force a trade. You see that this bishop is in the corner and they only have access to this diagonal. There is a very specific reason why Gukesh moved this move king to e5, and it was seeing what Liren was going to do in that position. He actually blundered the entire game by doing this move, by trading the rooks in this situation. The move that I'm looking for, if you found it, congratulations, is bishop to d5. This forces the trade of bishops, and it puts black in a completely won endgame. Going forward, like I will come back to kind of this section at the end of the game, but let me go ahead and just go to the end. The bishop takes on d5. We got king taking d5. We got king up to e3 and then king to e5. And it is at this point that Liren resigns the game and Gukesh becomes the youngest world champion in history at 18 years old. Okay. So I think a lot of you guys are probably sitting here looking at this like, bro, like what does this even mean? Like, I mean, can't the kings just kind of dance back and forth and like everything is everything? You absolutely cannot do that. After I show you kind of all of these different scenarios as to why this wins the game, I will travel back and show you kind of what the idea was kind of before that. Okay, so in this position here, obviously you guys can see that you have a few moves if you're white. You have one of these moves, well, 4 moves. King to d3 is going to be the absolute best move. It's going to be the move that kind of like resists as long as possible. But let's just look at some of the other moves that white has at their disposal and why they're losing. You would be looking at possibly king to f2. Anything basically where the king moves backwards are just completely losing like way quick. So just to kind of illustrate to you guys what it would look like, the king would go back to f2. And you do have to find this move king to d4 outflanking. Taking the diagonal opposition to this king right here. After we see the move king to e2, we would be looking at king to e4. And you see that this king is directly next to their other pawn. They're able to push this pawn. They're able to get their king in a situation where they are going to be in front of this. They're going to be able to push this pawn forward in the typical type of an in-game way and queen on this square. And there is nothing that black is going to be able to do about it. Now, if we go back after king to e5, if you did see the move king to d2, you would be looking at just a transposition. It would get you to this position here. But if we did see the most resistant move, and that is king to d3, we would be looking at the move f4, and then after the king would try to go back to e2, you would be looking at f3 with check. The king would go up to e3. We would be looking at f2, deflecting the king back. And then after we see king takes f2, we will be looking at king to d4. It's always important in these endgames that you take the diagonal opposition to this king. But one of the more important things, the stuff that I was telling you guys before, If you have blocked pawns in an endgame with kings, and you can reach one of these squares here as black, or you can reach one of these 3 squares here as white. You would be reaching something that we call key squares. And that's basically kind of just a guide that you can use as far as endgame is concerned about who can capture the opposing pawn and still protect their pawn also. So you see that we have this situation. So if we kind of run another move or two, you know, we would be looking at this situation here, and the king would just be continuing to back up white's king. And you see that now Gukesh has gotten into the key squares of this pawn right here. And so that is how we see that right there. And you're just going to move over, mop up, you know, the pawn right here. And you're going to be able to push your pawn home and make sure you do the triangulation that you might need. But going back in this position, so after we saw this position here, bishop went to A8. We got the king going back to F6. And then we have rook going to F4. Because of the move king to E5, like I said, it was absolutely, you cannot trade pieces because you're going to be giving black just a completely one position. So, for example, like if you had a situation, let's say like the king moved back here, then you actually in this position, because, you know, the black king is not here and it cannot force the trade of this bishop, you would be okay to actually trade here. And I mean, if you go in this trade right here, you still have the ability of maintaining your bishop. Because obviously this move cannot be made trapping the bishop because it would just be completely on something like this. And then now white is completely winning. So it's those little subtle differences. And it's crazy that when you play chess, everybody is always telling you, oh, you got to study end games. And people are like, well, I mean, if I don't make it out of the opening or the middle game, how can I make it to the end game? And you are absolutely correct with that. But just be careful to make sure that you are studying end games and middle games and tactics and openings evenly and not just heavily favoring one over the other. But if you do favor one, it should be end games. But that kind of gives you an example of what the game could have looked like in different scenarios. But that is pretty much showing you why the game was completely won for Gukesh. And of course, both of these players, when they get to that point, you know, after king to E5, both players can see that this is completely won for Gukesh. And so that is why we saw Liren resign the game. So that is pretty historic. You know, that's 18 years old, man. That's really, really young to be a world champion, bro. That's really kind of young to be doing anything. So he kind of has his whole life ahead of him. And, you know, we'll see how long he wants to be the world champion. And we'll also see if Magnus Carlsen wants to take up the challenge and say, hey, man, you know what? I think I want to try to be a world champion again. Because, I don't know, man. I think that'd be a good matchup. I'm definitely for that. But I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Meraming salamat aking makaibigan. You know, kamusta na, mabuhay to you. Anybody coming from China, I will say shishi and wito jian. Anybody coming from India, I will say vanakkam and namaskaram and danyavadalu mikanandri. I'm going to see you guys next time.